He gave His only Son so that everyone who believes in Him may not perish, but may have eternal life. Indeed, God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through Him. Those who believe in Him are not condemned, but those who do not believe are condemned already, because they have not believed in the name of the only Son of God. And this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and people love darkness rather than the light, because their deeds were evil. For all who do evil hate the light and do not come to the light, so that their deeds may not be exposed. But those who do what is true come to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that their deeds have been done in God. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
I think that I've shared with you, I'm pretty sure I've shared it in the last couple of years, that I've been to Mammoth Cave, and I've gone on the tour, and I've gone to the center of Mammoth Cave, and they turned out all the lights. Have you all ever done that?
Yep.
It's pretty dark, isn't it? What I probably have not shared with you is that I had a friend that owned Central Rock Company, which had the quarry downtown. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but downtown, Central Rock Company, you saw the sign, but back in the back was this incredible quarry. And you know those big, humongous trucks with the tires that are bigger than my head, or higher than my head? You know, they would drive into this cavernous place, and it would go for miles, or it felt like miles to me, because my friend took me down in there in a car, in a big car. I mean, because these big trucks, and it was like the ceilings down there were higher than this, and it was just huge. And we drove and drove and drove, and all of a sudden, you stopped the car and turned out the lights. I won't tell you what he said then. He was joking. I have heard that deep in these caverns, that the darkness is like 140% dark. That it is darker than anything that we could ever experience above ground. I don't understand what 140% dark is, but I believe it, because if you've ever been in those caves, you know that you just simply are blind in the cave when you turn out the lights. Darkness is a metaphor for us in many ways. You know, I'm going through a dark time. It means I'm going through a rough time. I'm going through a depressed time. I'm going through an uncertain time. I'm going through something that's making me anxious, something that's making me fearful, something that's challenging me in this moment if we go through this darkness. And this morning's gospel, I want to preface it a little bit. Nicodemus, I don't know if you remember him, but he was a Pharisee that came to Jesus right before the passage I read. And he came to Jesus in the dark of night. And the reason that he came in the dark of night is he didn't want anybody to know what he was doing, you know. And I think that that's probably partly, you know, if you think about darkness, we don't like to go, little children are afraid, so they have the night light because they're afraid of the dark. We don't like to go out in the dark. You have to sort of get used to the dark. Out where I am, there's a lot of darkness, and if you're not used to being out in the country and all the shadows and the trees and all that stuff, can be really scary if you're not familiar with it. Or if you're walking downtown in an alley or something like that in the middle of the night and it's really dark, you know, you've heard of the dark alley, then there's some fear there. And part of the reason is because people who do bad things are typically out doing nefarious things in darkness. And so it's more dangerous for us when we can't see, when we can't go forward. And so Nicodemus, coming to Jesus in the dark of night, so nobody could see him, was basically, and you probably remember, he talked to Jesus because he really was attracted to Jesus, but he didn't want anybody to know because he was a Pharisee and he was kind of high up in the echelon. And so Jesus is talking to him and explaining to him, and the very fact that he came in darkness kind of lends itself to this passage because this is Jesus' explanation. If you are in darkness, then you're probably not with God. You're probably doing evil things. And he was referencing Nicodemus and the Pharisees and the people who were not believing in God and not adapting those ways and not trying to live in to the love and joy of God that Jesus was manifesting at that time. So, you can tell I've been up since 3:30. My body time. Let me get my train of thought here. So that's where I came up with this darkness to light thing. Is in the gospel, Jesus is talking about how bad it is to be in darkness and how good it is to come to the light. And you all know very good and well, because you've heard it so many times, that Jesus and God are many, many, many times during the New Testament attributed to light. Light is the metaphor. Light and love is the metaphor for God. You hear it in John's Gospel all the way through. You also hear it in 1 John. You hear it in Peter. You hear it when Paul writes to the Colossians. He says in chapter 1, he says, "You are a holy people, and you are adopted into the kingdom of light." So light is a big deal. When you think about God and you think about Jesus, you think about light and love. And it's the opposite of this deep darkness, this 140% darkness that I talked about a little bit earlier. But I read something this week that I think is really kind of fascinating. That if you go back to Hebrew Scriptures, actually if you go back to 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 12, you will find that God dwells in deep darkness. Now that's the opposite of everything we hear with what we just talked about, with the Gospel of John and 1 John and Peter and Colossians, and the metaphor that we typically use. So what is this God dwells in deep darkness? And actually it's 3 or 4 times in the Hebrew Scriptures. So I want to posit to you something that I think is a reality that a lot of times we don't really appreciate. And that is that God dwells with us when we are in darkness. When we are uncertain, when we are suffering, when we are anxious, when we are fearful, when we don't know where the next step is going to take us, God is with us, right beside us, and ready to help navigate us out of that darkness. As in the gospel, is ready to bring us into the light, into the love, into what we were created for. And God, that glorious God that created us, meets us where we are. No matter how miserable and no matter how rough our life happens to be. And you all probably have heard of C.S. Lewis. He wrote a book called The Horse and His Boy. Not a book, it's a story. But it captures this idea beautifully, and I just wanted to read you just a moment of this story because it's so perfect. And being very tired, and having nothing left inside of him, Shasta felt so sorry for himself that the tears rolled down his cheeks. What put a stop to all this was a sudden fright. Shasta discovered that someone or somebody was walking beside him. It was pitch dark and he could see nothing. And the thing, or the person, was going so quietly that he could hardly hear any footfalls. The thing, unless it was a person, went on beside him so very quietly that Shasta began to hope that he had only imagined it. So he went on at a walking pace, and the unseen companion walked and breathed beside him. At last he could bear it no longer. "Who are you?" he said, barely above a whisper. "One who has waited long for you to speak," said the thing. Its voice was not loud, but very large and deep. The boy in this story is lost, and his mysterious companion is, of course, Aslan, the high king above all kings. Aslan was with the boy in his darkest times, simply waiting for the boy to speak so that Aslan could comfort him. I don't know about you, but I have to confess that there are many times when I have been struggling, or I have been suffering, or I have been wondering what I was going to do or worrying about something, and I have gone for a while, and all of a sudden it sort of hits me. Why don't you pray about this? You know what? I just ask myself, it's like, why does it, and then I wonder, why does it take me so long, when I talk about this stuff all the time, to get to there? But usually we're so caught up in whatever it is that's grabbing us that the last thing on our mind is God. Yet God is right there with us, waiting for us to speak.